just tell a little bit about yourself to the rest of us?
I was an only child for 7.5 years before my mother downloaded three daughters. Kind of fell apart. And it was my duty to take care of everybody. That's how we get into the helping professions. I went to the Salvation Army store with my mother, and I must have been 7. And I have no idea why. I picked up the book and I said to my mother, "This is a nickel. Would you buy it for me, please?" She said, "Sure." And it was Freud's interpretations of dreams.
Oh my God. I didn't know that.
Hey, I'm holding stuff back here. But I was fascinated by it. Dreams, inner life, feeling. I was born with a predisposition of feeler, which could have crushed me, and almost did.
How old were you when you realized that you had that other people didn't have it, and that you needed to hide it?
I would say 50. You want the truth?
Okay.
I came back to Penn State University, which is one of the finer, had one of the finer psychology departments in the nation, in the top 10. American psychology was in the thrall of Skinner's black box. I call it Buddhism without the mind.
Can you give us a little background on Skinner and what he was saying? What was the philosophy behind that?
Skinner and Watson, Pavlov in Russia, they were looking at the conditioned patterns of behavior. One would not look to the mind. One would look for inter-rater reliability by operationalizing the behavior that could be observed. In other words, psychology was trying to become physics.
Deterministic and mechanistic.
And that was not where I was coming from. I was a fish out of water. I was not doing what my field tended to do, was to see a person and put them into a diagnosis that labeled them. The very act of doing that contracted what might be possible to see.
Mm-hmm.
But I tried to just witness. I began to discover there were things occurring in human beings that were not being seen.
Would you say that the heart was a kind of extra sense that allowed you to see things that were real, things that were true about human beings and the human mind, that without the heart, metaphorically speaking, it couldn't be seen, couldn't be even studied because they wouldn't be perceived?
Without the heart. And the idea of the dualism of going to the heart without the rational mind is we don't lose our rational mind, we maintain that, but it drops into the apprehension of the heart. The heart stumbled upon a wider range of what we are and what we potentially could be. We are the space, our eternal face, in which the story is dreamt. I am the space where Rick dreams he's Rick. That truth is, we're swimming in it. There's no secret order of wisdom keepers who know. It's exactly the opposite.
It's right under our noses.
We're swimming in it.
Yeah, it's everywhere. That's why it's so difficult to see. There is a generalized increase in suffering amongst people of all classes, of all ethnicities, of all backgrounds. And I wonder, in all these years, what you have learned about the nature of this suffering.
Suffering is a lack of meaning in the culture. We are atomized. We do not have the bonds of clan, family, the storyteller who comes to tell this myth of how we began and who we are. I see the suffering as the fundamental core sense of meaningless and disconnection.
So we are back to that question of the interface between psychology and ontology, right? Because you just diagnosed our current human suffering as a lack of meaning, as a lack of connection to the earth, to each other, and to something that is transcendent. But how does the therapist in the therapy room restore that to the patient, or to your fellow pilgrims, as you call them? How do you restore that if they believe in the ontology of materialism, if they believe that fundamentally we are biological machines, fundamentally disconnected from everybody and everything else? How can therapy be done without an interface to a conducive ontology? Is this absolutely necessary, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. And how it's done is step by step, we give language and form to what was once unconscious and unfelt, and begin to develop a language that shows and a vocabulary that speaks of human beings as processes. As moving down the river, we're never the same. The culture that loses the language of movement and sacred roots and processes, people are encouraged to become nouns. And when one becomes a noun, we grasp and we suffer.
Do you see, Rick, with your experience dealing with the human soul all these years, do you see meaning, purpose, and usefulness in suffering? Is it all for nothing, or is it doing something ultimately positive to us? It's taking us somewhere.
Yes. Look to your depression, whatever the sadness, subjective sadness, the sense of ennui, melee, good French words, the deadening, anhedonia, lack of feeling, enthusiasm for life. What is that pointing toward? Your symptoms, or your spirit is telling you something. Your suffering is pointing toward a movement.
You've had experience working with the dying. I wonder what you've learned from that.
In the clarity of seeing life at the end, they realize something that is not, we're caught up in the trance and don't realize. Their responses, 100%. I can't say there was any, they said it in different words, but it was about, I should have worked less, I spent more time giving and loving and being with my family. It was always about a way of giving love, and it was nothing else.
Rick, how do you see the future? Are you hopeful?
Yes and no. It oscillates. And one thing I had learned over the years in practice, particularly when I was doing group therapy, thousands of hours of that, nothing would be happening. And I would say to myself, trust the process. Trust the process. Even when it looked dim, it couldn't happen. And what I found is trusting the process and standing the ground, and what would unfold, is never what we think it is anyway, but the process, given an unfolding time, patience, always created something novel and beautiful and meaningful. And I take that individual experience and say, trust the process.